The Clockmaker's Children. A dark fantasy tale for the new year. Prologue. The Last Midnight. In the small mountain town of Winterhaven, there was a tradition that everyone followed without question. On New Year's Eve, all the clocks in town had to strike midnight at exactly the same moment. Not a second early, not a second late. Perfect synchronization. It was the clockmaker who ensured this happened. Every December, he would visit each house, each shop, each building, and adjust every clock and watch to match his master timepiece, a magnificent grandfather clock that stood in the tower at the center of town. The clockmaker had performed this duty for as long as anyone could remember, as had his father before him, and his father before that, stretching back generations. No one questioned why it was so important. It was simply the way things had always been done in Winterhaven. The clocks had to strike midnight together, or, well, no one really knew what would happen. The clockmaker never explained, and people had learned not to ask. But this year, something was different. This year, the clockmaker had died. He had passed away in October, quietly in his sleep, leaving behind only his shop full of ticking clocks and a granddaughter no one had known existed. The girl had arrived from the city 3 days after his funeral, carrying a single suitcase and a letter that proved she was his heir. Her name was Clara, and she was 12 years old. The town council had been uncertain what to do. Could a child possibly maintain the town's clocks? Could she perform the sacred duty that her grandfather had carried out for 50 years? But Clara had insisted she could do it. Her grandfather had taught her, she said. She knew what needed to be done. And so, with only 2 days left until New Year's Eve, Clara began her work. But there were things about Winterhaven that Clara didn't know. Things her grandfather had kept secret, even from her. Things that only revealed themselves when the veil between years grew thin. Things that were about to wake up. Part 1. The Clockmaker's Shop. Clara stood in her grandfather's shop, surrounded by the constant tick-tock of 100 clocks. The sound should have been chaotic, overwhelming, but somehow all the clocks ticked in perfect unison, creating a single rhythm that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The shop was exactly as her grandfather had described it in his letters, narrow and deep, with shelves climbing to the ceiling, every surface covered in timepieces of every size and shape. Pocket watches hung from hooks like strange fruit. Wall clocks of carved wood stared down with faces that seemed almost alive. And in the back of the shop stood the work table where her grandfather had performed his repairs, tools laid out with meticulous precision. Clara had loved her grandfather deeply, though she had only seen him a handful of times in her life. He had left her family when Clara's mother was young, something to do with the disagreement about duty and sacrifice. But he had written to Clara every month since she was old enough to read, long letters full of stories about clocks and time and the importance of keeping things in order. And he had taught her, during those rare visits, how to repair watches, how to adjust timing mechanisms, how to listen to the heartbeat of a clock and understand what it needed. Now he was gone, and she was alone. "Are you really going to do this by yourself?" Clara turned to find a boy about her age standing in the doorway of the shop. He had dark hair and curious eyes, and he watched her with a mixture of skepticism and interest. "I don't have much choice," Clara replied. "Someone has to set the clocks, and I'm the only one who knows how.
I'm Thomas, the boy said, stepping inside. I live across the street. My mom sent me to check if you needed help with anything.
I'm fine, thank you. You don't look fine, Thomas said frankly. You look like someone who just inherited a job they don't understand and is trying really hard not to panic. Clara wanted to argue, but he was right. She understood clocks, yes. She could repair them, adjust them, make them keep perfect time. But she didn't understand why it mattered so much, why the whole town was so insistent that every clock strike midnight together on New Year's Eve. My grandfather never explained, she admitted. He just said it was important, vital, that if the clocks weren't synchronized, something terrible would happen. No one in town knows either, Thomas said. It's just tradition, something we've always done. He paused. Though there are stories. What kind of stories? Thomas glanced around, as if checking to make sure they were alone. Stories about what happened in other towns that didn't keep the tradition. Towns where the clocks all struck midnight at different times, where time got confused. People say those towns don't exist anymore, that they slipped through the cracks somehow, fell into moments that never quite finished. That's just a story to scare children, Clara said, though she felt a chill. Maybe, Thomas agreed, but your grandfather took it seriously, and so does everyone else in Winterhaven, which means you probably should too. Clara looked at the list her grandfather had left. Every address in town, every clock that needed to be checked and adjusted. There were hundreds of them, and she had only 2 days. I'm going to need help, she said finally. Thomas grinned. That's why I'm here. When do we start? They began that afternoon, working systematically through the town. Clara carried her grandfather's master timepiece, a beautiful pocket watch that kept perfect time, and her tools. Thomas carried the record book and helped navigate to each address. Most people were kind, welcoming them into their homes, offering cookies and hot chocolate as Clara worked on their clocks. But there was an undercurrent of nervousness in everyone they met, a tension that grew as New Year's Eve approached. And Clara began to notice something strange. In every house there were children, more children than she would have expected in a town this size, and the children all watched her with peculiar intensity, as though they knew something the adults didn't. Why are there so many kids here? Clara asked Thomas as they walked between houses. There aren't, Thomas said, looking confused. There are maybe 20 kids total in Winterhaven. It's mostly older people. But Clara had counted at least 15 children just that afternoon. She was certain of it. That night, back in the apartment above the shop that was now hers, Clara couldn't sleep. The ticking of the clocks below was too loud, too insistent. She found herself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to that rhythmic pulse. And then, at exactly 3 minutes past midnight, all the clocks stopped. The silence was deafening. Clara sat up in bed, her heart pounding. In her grandfather's letters, he had been emphatic. The clocks must never stop. Never. They were more than just timekeepers. They were anchors, he had written, though he never explained what they anchored or why. She grabbed a lantern and hurried down to the shop. In the flickering light, she could see that every clock had frozen at 3 minutes past midnight. Every single one. Clara approached the nearest clock, a carved wooden cuckoo clock from the Black Forest, and opened its case. The mechanism looked fine. the weights properly hung, the pendulum ready to swing, but it wouldn't start. She tried another clock. Same problem. The mechanisms were perfect, but they refused to move. Then she heard it, a child's laughter, coming from somewhere in the back of the shop.
"Hello?" Clara called out, her voice shaking slightly. "Is someone there?"
The laughter came again, closer now. Clara moved deeper into the shop, past the shelves of timepieces, toward the back room where her grandfather had done his most delicate work. The door to the back room was open, though Clara was certain she had closed it earlier. Beyond the doorway, she could see movement, small figures darting in the shadows.
"Who's there?" Clara demanded, trying to sound braver than she felt.
A child stepped into the light, a girl, perhaps 8 years old, wearing a dress that looked decades out of fashion. Her eyes were strange, too bright, too knowing for a child's eyes. "You're not the clockmaker," the girl said. "You're too young."
"My grandfather was the clockmaker," Clara replied. "He died. I'm taking over his duties."
"But you don't know the secret," another child said, appearing beside the first. This one was a boy, about 10, also dressed in old-fashioned clothes. "You don't know what the clocks really do." More children emerged from the shadows, 5, 10, 15 of them, all dressed in clothes from different eras, spanning decades or even centuries, all watching Clara with those too bright, too knowing eyes. "Who are you?" Clara whispered. "We're the clockmaker's children," the first girl said, "and we've been waiting for midnight." Part 2. The Children Between Hours. Clara backed away slowly, her mind racing. The children didn't move to follow her, but they watched with unsettling intensity. "What do you mean, the clockmaker's children?" she asked. "We belong to the clocks," the girl explained. "Or the clocks belong to us. It's hard to explain. Your grandfather understood. He kept us safe, kept us contained. But now he's gone, and the clocks have stopped, and we can move again." "I don't understand." "Time is not as simple as people think," one of the boys said. He was older than the others, perhaps 14, with serious eyes. "It doesn't just flow forward in a straight line. It loops and curves and folds back on itself. And in the places where it folds, where one moment touches another, there are gaps, spaces between seconds where things can get stuck." "We got stuck," the first girl continued. "All of us. We were children in Winterhaven, in different years, different decades, different centuries, and we did something we shouldn't have. We played games with time. We tried to stop it, or skip forward, or go backward, and we fell through the cracks." "The first clockmaker found us," the older boy said. "Found ways to bind us to the clocks, to keep us from falling further. The clocks became our prison and our protection. As long as they tick in unison, as long as they keep perfect time, we stay contained. But when they stop—" "We can get out," the youngest child finished, a boy who couldn't have been more than 6. "Just for a little while, just until someone starts them again." Clara looked at the frozen clocks all around her. "How do I start them again?" "You can't," the first girl said. "Not alone. It takes the clockmaker to do it. Someone who understands the mechanisms, yes, but also someone who has made the bargain." "What bargain?" "The bargain that keeps Winterhaven safe," the older boy explained. "The bargain your grandfather made, and his father before him, going back generations. The clockmaker gives up something precious, their connection to ordinary time, their ability to age normally, their chance at an ordinary life. In return, they gain the power to keep the clocks synchronized, to hold the children in their prison, to protect the town from the chaos that would come if we were released permanently. Clara felt cold. My grandfather never told me about any bargain. He probably hoped you wouldn't have to know, the girl said. But he's dead now, and someone needs to take his place. Someone needs to make the choice.
What happens if I don't? If I just leave, go back to the city?
The children exchanged glances. Then on New Year's Eve, when the clocks should strike midnight together, they'll strike at different times instead, the older boy said, and we'll be free, all of us, and we'll do what children who have been trapped for decades or centuries naturally do.
What's that?
We'll play, the girl said, and there was something hungry in her smile. We'll play games with time, with the people of Winterhaven. We'll make them experience what we experienced, moments that loop forever, seconds that stretch into years, hours that skip and jump and fold back on themselves. We don't mean to be cruel. We just forget how fragile normal people are, how easily they break when time stops making sense. You're threatening the whole town, Clara said, her voice hardening. We're not threatening, the youngest boy said. We're just explaining. We've been here so long, Clara, so very long, and we're tired of being trapped. Your grandfather understood. He kept us contained, but he also talked to us, visited us, made sure we weren't completely alone. But then he died, and we've been in the dark ever since, and we just want to be free. Clara looked at their faces, young faces that held ancient loneliness. She thought about what her grandfather had sacrificed, the normal life he'd given up to keep these children contained, the family he'd left behind, including her mother, choosing duty over love. There has to be another way, she said, something besides trapping you forever or releasing you to hurt people.
If there is, the older boy said, we don't know it, and we've had a very long time to think about it.
Then let me think about it too, Clara said. I have until New Year's Eve. That's 2 days. Maybe I can find a solution your grandfather couldn't. The children considered this. Finally, the first girl nodded. 2 days, she agreed. But the clocks have to stay stopped until you decide. That's the price of this conversation. Every hour they remain stopped, we grow a little stronger, a little more able to influence the waking world. If you wait too long, even making the bargain won't be enough to contain us.
Understood, Clara said, though fear was coiling in her stomach.
The children faded back into the shadows, disappearing as suddenly as they'd appeared. Clara was left alone in the shop, surrounded by frozen clocks, their hands all pointing to 3 minutes past midnight.
She didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, she searched through her grandfather's papers, looking for anything that might explain the situation more clearly, that might suggest a solution she hadn't considered. By dawn, she had found her grandfather's journal, a thick, leather-bound book hidden in a locked drawer of his desk. The journal went back 50 years, documenting every year of his service as clockmaker. Clara read frantically, skipping through entries, looking for answers. Her grandfather's handwriting grew shakier as the years progressed, but his commitment never wavered. He wrote about the children, about his conversations with them, about the weight of keeping them contained while knowing they were suffering.
And then, in an entry from just 6 months before his death,
she found something that made her heart race. "I believe I have found a solution. Not a perfect one. There are no perfect solutions in matters of time, but perhaps a better one than endless imprisonment or chaotic release. The children are stuck because they disrupted time through ignorance and fear. What if they could be unstuck by embracing time consciously and willingly?" There is a ritual described in the oldest texts. On New Year's Eve, at the moment between years, when one year dies and another is born, there is a gap, a natural fold in time. If the children could be guided through that fold, not falling through it, but walking through it with purpose and understanding, they might be able to return to their own times. Not as they were, too much time has passed for that, but as something new, time spirits, perhaps, guardians of moments, no longer trapped, but no longer entirely children either. But the ritual requires a guide, someone who stands outside normal time, who can walk the spaces between seconds without being destroyed, someone like the Clockmaker. "I am too old for such a journey, but perhaps my granddaughter, if she proves worthy of the title, might be young enough and brave enough to try."
Clara read the passage 3 times, her mind spinning. Her grandfather had found a way, not to trap the children forever, not to release them to cause chaos, but to transform them, to help them become something new.
But it would require her to step fully into the role of Clockmaker, to make the bargain, to give up her ordinary life. She thought about her mother in the city, waiting for Clara to return after settling her grandfather's affairs. She thought about school, about friends, about the normal teenage life she'd been looking forward to. And she thought about the children, trapped for centuries, and about the town of Winterhaven, which would be destroyed if she failed. When Thomas knocked on the shop door at 8 in the morning, Clara had made her decision. "I need your help," she told him, "and not just with setting clocks. I need help with something much bigger." Part 3. The Ritual of Hours. Clara explained everything to Thomas: the children, the bargain, the ritual. She expected him to think she was crazy, to back away and never return. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "That explains a lot," he said. "I always wondered why your grandfather seemed different, like he was here but also somewhere else at the same time." "You believe me?"
"I've lived in Winterhaven my whole life," Thomas said. "I've seen weird things, moments that repeat, shadows that move wrong, a kid in my class who swears he lived through the same Tuesday 3 times last year. Yeah, I believe you."
"I'm going to try the ritual," Clara said, "but I need help preparing. According to my grandfather's notes, I need to gather specific items and set up the town square in a particular way. And I need to start all the clocks again, get them all synchronized before midnight on New Year's Eve." "That's a lot to do in 2 days." "I know, but if we don't try, then the children go free and the town is destroyed." "Yeah, I get it." Thomas rolled up his sleeves. "Let's get to work." They spent December 30th gathering the items the ritual required. According to her grandfather's notes, they needed 12 candles made from beeswax, representing the 12 hours of the clock, 7 mirrors of different sizes, representing the 7 days of the week, a circle of salt wide enough to hold all the children, and most importantly, the master clock from the town tower, which would need to be brought down to the square.
The candles and mirrors were easy enough to find in the shop. The salt took several trips to the general store, whose owner looked at them strangely but didn't ask questions.
The clock tower was the real challenge.
The tower stood in the center of town square, 50 feet tall, with the massive clock face visible from every street. Clara and Thomas climbed the narrow stairs to the clock room, where the enormous mechanism filled the entire space.
"We're supposed to bring this down?" Thomas asked, looking at the machinery in dismay.
"Not all of it," Clara said, consulting her grandfather's drawings. "Just the heart of it, the main escapement and the pendulum. That's what actually keeps time. The rest is just decoration."
It took them hours to carefully disconnect the central mechanism. It was heavy, requiring both of them to carry it, but they managed to lower it down the tower stairs and into the square below. As they worked, Clara felt the presence of the children watching. They didn't appear, but she could sense them in the spaces between seconds, in the gaps of time, waiting, growing stronger as the clocks remained stopped.
December 31st dawned cold and clear. Clara had barely slept, her mind running through the ritual steps over and over. According to her grandfather's notes, the ritual had to begin exactly at 11 p.m. and conclude precisely at midnight. Timing was everything. The townspeople began gathering in the square around sunset, drawn by curiosity and tradition. It was customary for the whole town to be present when the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve, though no one remembered why. They came bundled in warm coats, carrying thermoses of hot cider, ready to celebrate the new year.
But they found the square transformed.
Clara and Thomas had arranged everything according to the ritual specifications. The 12 candles stood in a circle, unlit. The 7 mirrors were positioned around the circle, angled to reflect and redirect light. The salt circle was drawn, wide enough to hold 20 children. And in the very center stood the clock mechanism from the tower, its brass gears gleaming in the fading light.
"What's all this?" Mayor Davidson asked, approaching Clara with concern. "Where are the usual decorations?"
"This is how it needs to be," Clara said firmly. "I'm going to perform the ritual my grandfather always did, the one that keeps the town safe." "But he never did anything like this," the mayor protested. "He just made sure the clocks were all set correctly." "That's what you saw," Clara said. "But there was more to it. Things he did in private, things I'm going to do publicly. Trust me." The mayor looked uncertain, but other townspeople were nodding. There was something in Clara's voice, an authority that came from somewhere beyond her 12 years. The authority of the Clockmaker. At 10 p.m., Clara asked everyone to be silent. She lit the 12 candles one by one, speaking words in a language her grandfather had taught her, old words that described time not as a line, but as a spiral, not as a river, but as an ocean with tides and depths.
As the candles burned, the mirrors began to glow, reflecting and amplifying the light. The salt circles started to shimmer.
And the children appeared. The townspeople gasped as 15 children materialized inside the circle, dressed in clothes from different eras, their eyes too bright, too ancient. Some people recognized features, the curve of a cheek, the color of hair, in the faces of their own ancestors.
"Are those," Mayor Davidson whispered, "are those the lost children? The ones from the old stories?"
"They're not lost anymore," Clara said. She stepped up to the edge of the salt circle, directly facing the oldest boy. I'm going to try to send you home. Not to where you came from. That's impossible now. But to where you belong. To your proper place in time.
You haven't made the bargain yet, the boy said. You don't have the power.
I know. Clara took a deep breath. I'm making it now. She placed her hands on the clock mechanism in the center of the circle and spoke the words of the Clockmaker's oath, words her grandfather had written in his journal, words that had been passed down through generations.
I am the keeper of hours, the guardian of moments, the one who stands between ticks. I give my ordinary time so that all may keep theirs. I accept the burden, the duty, the endless watch. From this moment forward, I am the Clockmaker.
Power surged through her like electricity. Clara gasped as she felt herself changing, felt her connection to normal time loosening, felt herself becoming something more and less than an ordinary 12-year-old girl. She was still Clara, but she was also something older, something that could see time not as a line, but as a landscape, not as a prison, but as a playground.
She was the Clockmaker, and now she had the power to complete the ritual. Take my hands, she said to the nearest children. Form a chain. Trust me. The children hesitated. Then slowly, one by one, they reached out. The youngest took Clara's hand, then reached for the girl beside him. That girl took the hand of the next child, and so on, until all 15 children were linked in a chain that began and ended with Clara. When the clock strikes midnight, Clara said, we're going to walk through the fold together. I'll guide you. I'll make sure you don't fall. And on the other side, you'll be free. Not children anymore, but not trapped either. You'll be guardians of moments, spirits of time itself. You'll finally belong somewhere. Will it hurt? The youngest child asked. I don't know, Clara admitted, but it will be over quickly, and you'll never be alone again. The town square clock, the one still mounted on the tower, began to move. Clara's power, newly awakened, had reached out and started it ticking again. And following its lead, all across Winterhaven, every clock began to move in perfect synchronization. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was like a heartbeat, like a drum, like the footsteps of an army marching toward an inevitable conclusion. 11:30, 11:45, 11:59. Clara felt time itself beginning to fold, felt the moment between years approaching. She tightened her grip on the children's hands and pulled the power of the Clockmaker into herself, using it to create a bridge, a path through the fold that the children could walk safely. The clock hands moved closer to midnight. 59 seconds. 58. 57. Don't let go, Clara said. No matter what you see, no matter what you feel, hold on. The townspeople watched in awe and terror as the air around the children began to shimmer and twist. Time itself was becoming visible, folding like origami, creating a passage. 10 seconds. 5, 3, 2, 1. Every clock in Winterhaven struck midnight at precisely the same instant. The sound was enormous, overwhelming, a symphony of bells and chimes and mechanical strikes that shook the ground itself. And Clara walked into the fold, pulling the children with her. Part 4. between years.
The passage between years was not a place exactly. It was a moment stretched infinite, a single second that contained multitudes. Clara found herself walking through a corridor of light and shadow, with the children following behind her, still holding hands, still trusting her to guide them.
Around them, she could see other moments, other times, like windows into the past and future. She saw Winterhaven as it had been centuries ago, just a handful of houses in a clearing. She saw it as it might be centuries hence, perhaps thriving or perhaps gone. She saw the children as they had been, truly young, truly innocent, playing games they didn't understand. And she saw the places where they had fallen through, the cracks in time where they had gotten stuck. "We're here," Clara said, though here was nowhere and everywhere at once. "This is where you transform. This is where you choose what you'll become."
One by one, the children began to change. The youngest boy dissolved into light and reformed as something beautiful and strange, a spirit of morning hours, guardian of dawn. The first girl became a keeper of evening, her eyes full of sunset colors.
The older boy transformed last, becoming something that Clara couldn't quite perceive, something that existed in the spaces between all hours, watching over the transitions, making sure others didn't fall as he had fallen. "Thank you," he said, his voice now like wind chimes. "Thank you for showing us the way." The children, no longer quite children, no longer quite trapped, dispersed through time itself, each finding their place, their purpose. Clara felt them settle into the fabric of moments, felt them become part of the eternal rhythm of hours and days and years. And then she was back in the town square, still holding the hands of nobody. The children were gone. The ritual was complete. The townspeople erupted in cheers, thinking the New Year's celebration had been extraordinary, not quite understanding what they had witnessed. Fireworks began to explode over the town. Someone had brought them, as was traditional, painting the sky in colors that seemed somehow more vibrant, more real than they should have been. Clara stood in the center of the salt circle, exhausted, transformed. She could feel the weight of her new role settling onto her shoulders, the duty of the clockmaker, the responsibility to keep time flowing smoothly, to make sure no one else fell through the cracks the way those children had. Thomas approached, studying her face. "You're different," he said quietly.
"I know." Clara looked down at her hands. They looked the same, but she could feel that she was changed on some fundamental level. "I won't age normally anymore. I'll grow, but slowly. By the time I look 20, I might actually be 40. By the time I look 40, I might be 80. That's the price."
Was it worth it?
Clara thought about the children, finally free, finally at peace. She thought about her grandfather, who had carried this burden for 50 years without complaint. She thought about Winterhaven, safe for another generation.
"Yes," she said, "it was worth it." Epilogue: The New Clockmaker. Clara did not return to the city. She wrote to her mother, explaining, as best as one could explain such things, that she had decided to stay in Winterhaven, to take over her grandfather's shop, to continue his work. Her mother didn't understand, but she accepted it. Some duties, Clara's letter said, were more important than ordinary life. Thomas became Clara's assistant, learning the craft of clockmaking,
helping with the daily tasks of keeping the town's timepieces synchronized. He didn't make the clockmaker's bargain. Only one person could hold that role, but he was there to help carry the weight.
The children, now spirits of time itself, sometimes visited, not visibly, but Clara could feel them in certain moments, in the pause between heartbeats, in the space between 1 second and the next. They were happy now, or as happy as such beings could be. They had purpose. They belonged.
And they helped in their way. Under their subtle guidance, time in Winterhaven flowed smoothly. Clocks rarely broke. Moments rarely stuttered or skipped. It was as though the town existed in a pocket of perfect temporal harmony, protected by the guardians Clara had helped create. Years passed. Clara grew slowly, as the clockmaker must, aging only a day for every week of real time. She watched Thomas grow at a normal pace, watched him marry and have children of his own, watched those children grow and have children in turn. She became a fixture of Winterhaven, as permanent as the clock tower, as reliable as the ticking of synchronized timepieces. Children were brought to her shop to learn about clocks and time. Adults came to her for advice on matters both temporal and otherwise. She was the clockmaker, and the clockmaker was more than just a repairer of mechanisms. She was a keeper of order, a guardian of continuity. On every New Year's Eve, Clara performed a smaller ritual in the town square, lighting 12 candles and setting up 7 mirrors, maintaining the connection between Winterhaven and the spirits of time. The townspeople attended, though most had forgotten why it was important. It was simply tradition now. But Clara remembered. She remembered the children who had been trapped, and the night she had guided them to freedom. She remembered her grandfather's journal, his wisdom, his sacrifice. She remembered the moment she had stepped into the fold between years and changed her entire destiny. And she remembered that time was not just a line or a river, but an ocean full of depths and mysteries, and that her job was to make sure people could navigate those waters safely, never falling through the cracks, never getting lost in the gaps between moments. 50 years after that first New Year's Eve ritual, Clara still looked barely 30. Thomas was gray-haired and retired, but he still visited the shop daily, still helped where he could. They would sit together in the workshop, surrounded by the ticking of clocks, and talk about the old days.
"Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked one evening. "Giving up your normal life?" Clara considered the question, listening to the rhythmic pulse of 100 synchronized timepieces. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I wonder what I might have been if I'd chosen differently. But then I remember the children, and I remember that some sacrifices are worth making." "Your grandfather would be proud," Thomas said. "I hope so." Clara picked up a pocket watch that needed repair, her skilled hands automatically assessing the problem. "I hope wherever he is, in whatever moment he occupies now, he knows that I understood, that I finally understood what he was trying to teach me in all those letters."
What's that?
That time isn't the enemy. It's not a prison or a punishment. It's a gift if you know how to hold it properly. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give is to help others hold their moments safely, to make sure they don't slip through the cracks the way those children did. Outside, the sun was setting over Winterhaven, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. The clock in the tower struck 6 p.m., and all across town, every clock echoed the chime in perfect unison. Tick, tick, tick. The heartbeat of a town that existed in perfect time, protected by a clockmaker who had given up ordinary hours to ensure that everyone else's moments remained safe.
Clara smiled and continued her work, repairing the watch in her hands, maintaining the endless rhythm, keeping the watch that her grandfather had kept before her, and that someday, perhaps, someone else would keep after her.
Because time marched forward, relentless and unstoppable. But in Winterhaven, it marched in perfect synchronization. And that made all the difference. The end.